Whew. I think I'll start a question for the panel about miscommunication in this space and what opportunities exist. So I'll kick this off. As a journalist, one of the things that I notice the most about miscommunication or challenges has to do with communicating really complex ideas to the public. Sometimes you have parents, sometimes you have kids, and this is an ever-growing space. So that is always one of the obstacles I face as a journalist. Amanda, what is one of those for you?
I would think a misconception about AI for me would be that it's entirely safe. So just being conscious of how you're using AI.
Yeah, I'm just gonna step up.
It's okay.
Angus?
I think for me, one of the biggest misconceptions about AI is that this is something brand new that we've never seen before. But in a lot of ways, AI is similar to past technologies that families and kids and parents have had to adapt to. So things like social media, things like the internet. So we don't need to rewrite the rule book. We don't need to go back from scratch, and we can learn from past experiences.
Good one.
I think a big misconception about AI is that it's actually more efficient than human decision making, which it is not always. Particularly because it can engender a lot of fairness and equality issues. And if we end up facing those issues, we usually have to backtrack and fix those issues. So the efficiency piece isn't always there.
That's a good one.
For me, I would say that the big myth that I would say with AI is that it's intelligent, that AI is, that it knows things, that it thinks for us, when in reality, AI, it doesn't really think what it is that it predicts. So it's a very sophisticated pattern matcher.
I would say, touching on a couple of things that were already raised, one of the big misconceptions about AI is that it's most useful to people who are novices, to people who don't know much about a subject. And in fact, the exact opposite is true. It's people who don't know much about a subject who are not able to understand the limitations of AI because they don't know enough about the question, about the topic, to tell when it's making a mistake. And a lot of the evidence shows, first, that where it is most useful is for people who already know the subject, who already have a lot of skill, because they're able to, first of all, identify when it's making a mistake, but also identify sort of when in the workflow it is most efficiently used. And I think we see that in a lot of research that's come out in the last 6 months that shows that the more people know about AI as well, in fact, the less they use it.
One of the common threads for all of your answers was about understanding the tool itself, better understanding its capabilities, and perhaps where it falls short. I'm curious, Angus, if you can talk a little bit about what you've seen through your research and your work about how that plays out day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we know about ChatGPT and other AI tools is that it's not at all a technology that everybody uses and everybody uses equally. We know that older adults almost never use ChatGPT. People over the age of 65 don't know anything about it at all. Whereas people younger, the youngest cohorts, almost all of them are using ChatGPT. So there's huge differences in the level of knowledge about this technology across different age groups, with the youngest people maybe knowing the most and the oldest people actually knowing the least. So a lot of the time it's going to feel like maybe your kids are ahead of the curve on you on this technology, or that parents are falling behind because kids know more about it, and it's in part because they're using it a lot more in a lot more ways.
Amanda, your program works a lot with parents and families. If, as Angus mentioned, it's young people who are using it the most and more aware of this technology, how can we help parents better understand these tools and prepare them for the future?
I would say as parents, we want to educate ourselves on how to use generative AI. Sit down with your child and get them to give you a little lesson about how they use it and the different use case examples. I think that's the best way to learn. Even myself, generally I've got the foundations. I started taking a 2-day, I'm working on my generative AI leader certification. And there's so much, but now I'm like in the background, I can understand everything that's going on. And so, I'm going a little bit deeper than most parents. But I think just taking the time to educate yourself and using your child to be that sounding board on how to use the tool and get them to demo like why they use it, how they use it, so you can kind of co-create together and share your learning there.
Create. I like that idea. And the programs that TELUS right now are providing to community members. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, we do have
Your digital literacy program?
Our digital literacy program. We offer workshops for people of all ages, all the way from grade 2 up to seniors. But most notably, we have our TELUS Wise Responsible AI workshop. Although it was designed with teenagers in mind, it's something that I think would be a great foundation for parents that have no idea of what AI is. It's a great introductory, and it was created in partnership with CIFAR, the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. So it's based off Destination AI, which is very in-depth, would probably take you a long time. This course will probably take you 30, 40 minutes. Yeah, because I think the biggest thing for that is the critical thinking that it teaches.
You know, what was really interesting as I was preparing for this panel, I was looking at some of the reports that have been provided by the Commissioner of Canada when it comes to privacy and young people. And so I'm wondering, Riley, if you can talk a little bit about the challenges when it comes to young people protecting their privacy, protecting the information they share online, and what parents should be worried about in those regards.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first it's really important to recognize what parents can do and what they cannot do. I think for a very long time, the responsibility for children's online privacy and safety has been shifted onto the shoulders of parents and teachers alone. And for us to really be able to empower children to safely navigate the online world, some of that responsibility needs to be shifted onto the companies that actually design the products and services that they use every day. So I think right now we're seeing around the world and in Canada too a big push for more regulation from the government to ensure that these products and services are being designed with children's safety and privacy in mind from the outset, rather than being something that's an afterthought and parents and teachers trying to scrambling to react to constantly changing technology and finding ways to keep their kids up to speed. So something we are seeing right now with the Canadian government is that they're looking at introducing privacy regulations specifically for children's data. It's in early stages, so watch this space, but there are really successful examples in other parts of the world where we've seen this, specifically in the UK.
This is going to be a follow-up question to that. Maybe Matthew can jump in afterwards. I'm wondering what parents and the public can do to push for faster changes in this space, to see more legislation, because it seems at times parents are kind of at the whims of politicians and what they view as critical in this space right now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the ways that parents can get involved now is with school, actually.
Schools, okay.
Yeah, I think there's a school is a place where parents can work with their children to advocate for their privacy rights, because most schools, most kids have digital technologies integrated into the classrooms with EdTech. So they're using digital technologies in some way or another in their regular learning. And that's a way that parents and kids can start having conversations about, okay, what is this technology? Is it privacy preserving? And potentially going to the school board, going to the teachers, and collectively working together to make sure that the technologies that are being used in classrooms are one that everybody's comfortable with.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was going to say. But I'm going to add on to that and just point out that it's an example of how, you know, what we might call traditional media literacy is still relevant in the age of AI. Because one of the most important things to understand if you're advocating for change in an industry is to understand that industry's revenue model. And the thing about AI is that none of these companies yet have a revenue model for making money from AI. Either they're burning through enormous amounts of venture capital in hopes of making money someday, or they're big companies like Alphabet or Meta or Microsoft. They're building AI into existing tools to stay ahead, you know, to stay up to date in the race. No one is making money from AI yet. Every company that is implementing AI is losing a lot of money on it. And that's why education is a huge, huge, huge market. It's why companies like OpenAI, like Alphabet, are pushing so hard to get their AI tools into the education market. But that also provides a really great opportunity for parents to advocate, to say, if you are going to be adopting these tools, first of all, what protections are there already in place? And are these sufficient, and then advocating. And in a school board, like the school boards in this region, these are enormous markets. These are markets that are big enough to actually make a difference in these companies' policies.
I think that's an important point to emphasize. I'm sure we all read about the eye-watering amounts that companies are pouring into AI right now, or perhaps AI companies that are being acquired, but the revenue model at this point in time is still trying to be worked out. It's still in its early stages. So how companies can make money, how they intend to pass that on to shareholders or even sometimes their customers in value is up in the air. Evangeline, you're an educator, you're an entrepreneur, and in a way we're kind of the same because we're always thinking about how we can communicate to the general public. I'm wondering, how do you view that space? How do you communicate complex topics?
In terms of like strategies.
Yeah.
So I like to always, I would say I would start with reframing what AI actually is. And I kind of went ahead and said this earlier, like what AI is and what it isn't. And just going back to that, the biggest myth that I've encountered is that people think AI is intelligent, but it knows a lot of things. But again, it doesn't. It's predictive. It predicts a lot of things, and it's again a very sophisticated matching, pattern matching. So it does. It generates ideas, or it generates rather. Patterns, but it doesn't actually do human thinking the way that humans do. So the way I would say people should view AI is something that we can co-create with, that we can partner with as parents. And what's important for us to instill in our children when we're looking at AI is to view it as something that's something that we can help our children gain perspective. Perspective of knowing how to use it in a way that'll help and enhance their learning instead of doing the thinking for them, especially in the education space.
What's interesting around the world when you take a look at how different countries approach AI is there's a difference in how they're integrating it into their curriculum, how they view its importance. And I'm wondering if we can go one by one about how do you view AI and the type of required knowledge it takes to use it in our schools. Let me rephrase that. Should we start incorporating education about AI into K-12, or should it start at high school? Should we be preparing kids for an AI future? What are your thoughts? Should we start with?
Sure. So we have one of the things that we do at Media Smarts is that we do keep track of curriculum across the country to see where digital media literacy are represented. And we are starting to see mentions of AI in some curriculum. More broadly, I think we are seeing mentions of algorithms. And I think that's the best way to approach it because first of all, it has that demystifying effect that if we talk about AI as a kind of an algorithmic system, we're stepping away from the idea of it being intelligent. But also, we know that a lot of the AI that kids encounter on a daily basis doesn't present itself as AI. It is the algorithm deciding what's on your For You page on TikTok. It's the algorithm deciding what ads you're shown on Instagram. It's the algorithm that determines what your Netflix home screen looks like. And increasingly, these are also the algorithms that affect our lives. The algorithms that decide whether we get a call back for a job, that decide how much we pay for a mortgage. So I think it should be included because we know this is a tool that is having widespread adoption.
Yes.
But I think it's important to place it within a context that is going to encourage a broader and more critical look at it, rather than just looking at it from a how to use it point of view.
Gotcha. And Evangeline, before I go to you, I just want to add for parents in the room that Finland actually has a publicly available curriculum when it comes to misinformation and AI. I'm not saying that that's something will be implemented in Canada anytime soon, but educators, perhaps something for you on your own time to look at, analyze, and maybe have a discussion with your school board.
So I'll jump off on what Matthew was saying as well. So I think that's really the important role of parents, and that's where they have to come in. Because as parents, critical thinking isn't really, having all the right answers in our back pockets. It's just knowing how to encourage our children to model curiosity. I think that's the most important component and when you're dealing with AI, because for families, when you use ChatGPT, for instance, like you don't have to be a text expert to do that. But as parents, if your child is using it and they're seeing, information being spat out to you, you should encourage your child to think about, so that's interesting. So what does that tell us about that information? Is there something that could be missing from that? Because these questions is really, it's curiosity and also critical thinking in action. And that's what we have to instill in our kids when they're using AI, so that they can really view it as a tool that they can use to expand their thinking and also to question the way they're thinking as well.
Yeah, I agree with Matthew completely and wholeheartedly. I think algorithmic literacy is an essential part of curriculum in today's day and age, especially too because we have to think about all the ways that AI is integrated into our lives beyond a child just logging onto ChatGPT. Google, for example, now gives you an AI overview. Many social media platforms do that as well. And I was just working on a research project with children a few weeks ago, and kids as young as 8 were using AI overview to do answers for their homework and questions about gaming already, and not necessarily aware that that was AI in itself because it wasn't ChatGPT. So just more power to you, Matthew. Everything you said, yeah.
I think this is a good example of one of the ways my organization, the DAIS, likes to think about AI, which is that there is a side of it that is a potentially productivity-enhancing tool. It's something that a lot of people think is going to be an important part of the future economy, but there's also a side of it that's harmful, potentially dangerous to people using it. And I think schools need to approach both sides of that. So it is really important that schools have a really strong foundational digital literacy curriculum. We see issues with that more broadly, not just in the AI space, but people struggle to understand the information they see online. They don't know if they're seeing fact, fiction. They can't tell the difference between the two, and AI is only going to make that riskier, and it just is another thing that needs to be added to an already existing digital media curriculum in schools. But the flip side is that right now, at least, it seems like employers are going to be expecting people to come into the workforce with at least some understanding of these tools. People need to know how they might be able to use them in jobs, and they need to know the limitations and where they won't be useful, even if their boss tells them to use it. And so important training both on the digital literacy side, but also on the how do we best use these tools to be productive side is important to incorporate in schools. Not necessarily at the same point, but both portions have to be there.
And Amanda.
Great. I think AI can be, as everyone mentioned, a great tool, but making sure that they're not using the tool as a shortcut, but it can help develop some of the skills when they're using that. And I think it should be taught because of privacy reasons, what we should and shouldn't be putting in the tool, and just recognizing that the use of this, you're feeding into a database, and that's building your digital footprint. And kids may not necessarily be aware of it because they're not per se on the internet posting or writing, but recognizing that these tools are collecting history, and they may be using that data for other purposes as well. So I think it's important we introduce it at, I wouldn't say like grade 2 or 3, but I'd say around grade 6, but leave it to the subject matter experts in education that it's really important to start discussing it, because it's everywhere and it's becoming almost seamless that you're like, wait a minute. Is this like a local AI and just doing something simple, or is this an AI that's trying to use human reasoning? So,
Angus, you kind of touched on something that's been in the news quite a bit, and that's workforce training. Right now, Canada is seeing quite high levels of youth unemployment. In fact, youth unemployment exceeds those for the national average. I'm wondering if the panel has any suggestions on where young people can go to learn some of those digital literacy skills, those AI skills that employers will expect young people to already have when they enter any job. I mean, Media Smarts, you have many opportunities and many modules online that teach digital literacy and training, but are there any other suggestions for parents who are in the audience or online?
I mean, like online, I know a lot of startups that are sort of getting into doing edtech and AI for kids. And a lot of them are doing it on a pilot model. So there's, for instance, I mean, Gemini, for instance. Gemini, you could use like do story time, and you can sit with your child and kind of work with them to create stories and like have like an illustration using Gemini itself. And there are like webinars that you can find online where they would host these. I guess a Zoom call where they would teach the kid how to do that. Libraries, I notice, also tend to do these,
TPL.
like what's happening today, like that they would have something where you can do a hands-on and get that exposure with AI, which I think the most important part though is to ensure that you are doing it with your kids and you're co-creating and sort of guiding them as they're learning it and learning with them as well.
Yeah.
Because that's how you can ensure that they're using it responsibly as well.
This is more of a policy question, so perhaps Angus, Riley, Matthew, you can step in. I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of the initiatives we're starting to see globally when it comes to protecting young people, when it comes to social media and AI, like age verification, our government-mandated identity checks. How do you feel about those measures, particularly when it comes to protecting young people? It's complex.
Sure, I'll go for it. So I think there are some great policy initiatives we're seeing emerge, and I think there are some not so great policy initiatives we're seeing emerge in terms of children's online safety and children's online privacy. Starting with the great ones, we have seen in the UK something called the Age Appropriate Design Code, which is the first piece of regulation for children's data anywhere in the world. And basically what it does is it requires online services to actually consider children's privacy when they are designing their tools and then limit or restrict the use of certain digital practices or activities that are known risks to children's privacy. So some of these could be things like geolocation services, one-to-one communication messaging on platforms, nudging, so deceptive design practices that might nudge a child or manipulate them into a behavior or a choice that isn't necessarily aligned with their best interest. So the UK successfully implemented that in 2021, and it's had some really great impact in terms of making changes for children's privacy online in the UK. What's great is we're seeing other countries follow this or be interested in following this, like the Canadian government, which has just closed up a consultation for trying to do something somewhat similar here in Canada. And I think protections like that focus on children's privacy in the sense that they require companies to do something about it in terms of the design of the product are really, really helpful or could have a really big impact down the road. Policy initiatives that I think are a little bit shakier are age verification mandates, which we're seeing in other parts of the world, and we're seeing them be floated as potential solutions here in Canada. The reason they're shaky is because we know they don't really work. They've existed on the internet for as long as really the internet has been running, and kids have still managed to find their ways to any corner of the internet that they want to find their way to. Kids are flexible, they're responsive, they're clever, and they'll find a way to participate. At the same time, children's participation is a right that they have and something that we want to encourage. We don't necessarily want to restrict children's digital participation, especially when we tell them, you need to have all this digital literacy and all these skills to be active and productive members of society when you're grown. So these are two competing narratives that we're giving to kids. So I think any type of restriction that just bans them from a space, number one, the effectiveness is not necessarily there. The existing age verification tools we have are either very privacy invasive or not necessarily effective and accurate. There's also some fairness and bias issues involved, which I won't get into right now because I could talk all day about that. But yeah, so I think we know that they're not necessarily effective and they don't promote children's participation, which is something that we should all be really concerned about. How can children participate online safely and equitably? And I think the best way to do that is to ask companies to design better products.
Yeah, just jumping off that, we have a decade of research, and including some of our own at Media Smarts, that shows that risk and opportunity go hand in hand online. That the kids that are doing meaningful things online, that are learning about things online, that are joining interest communities, that are getting involved in online activism, even signing online petitions, even things as simple as using the internet to find out when the next bus is coming. All of these things are correlated with engaging in riskier behaviors online. And similarly, kids who don't engage in risky behaviors, kids who are shielded from all the risks of being online, they participate less, and in the long run, they're actually less safe, because eventually those protections are going to be gone. Now, of course, that doesn't mean throwing the gates open wide. It doesn't mean not having any protections or not taking any steps to limit or manage risk. It means identifying when the benefits are worth the risks and how we can mitigate those risks. And a lot of that does have to do with participation in communities. So I often use an example of a great online community and tool called Scratch, which is, it's called Scratch. And it's created by MIT. It's 100% free, doesn't collect any data, anything like that. It's in many ways a terrific model. It's a place where kids learn a basic form of coding, and they make projects and they share them with one another. But because of that sharing element, it has a lot of social networking features. So you can like other people's projects, you can share other people's projects, you can comment on other people's projects. A lot of things that we are concerned about, especially in something that is aimed at kids starting at age 6, 7, 8, which is when my younger son started using it. They put a lot of effort into making sure those experiences are safe. So that's an example where, even for young kids, the community that they're being a part of, the learning that they're doing, the engagement is worth the risk. With AI, we have to wonder, what community are they joining? When you're communicating with a chatbot, you may be learning, but you're not joining a community. You're actually becoming more isolated. So I think that's not to say kids shouldn't be using AI tools at all, but I think that is what we have to consider. What are the positives that are getting from it, and to what extent do those outweigh the risks? And then, of course, once you've done that calculus, how are those risks being mitigated through things like the age-appropriate design code?
And I'll just add that this is an area where there's real tension between what experts have sort of seen and what a lot of people believe and want. So when we talk about age verification and age gating online products, there's a real push towards it in a lot of countries. A lot of places and jurisdictions have introduced age verification, and it's probably because it's an overwhelmingly popular policy among the public. So we've done research in Canada, and we found that something like 80% of Canadians want age verification for online platforms. Something like 75% think that people under 16 shouldn't be on social media at all, or at least that they shouldn't be allowed. And that sort of goes against what a lot of experts are saying when they look at the effectiveness of these policies and they look at what actually works on implementation. Countries and jurisdictions that have implemented age verification policies have struggled to actually have them prevent people from using the technology, and instead have often just made the technologies harder to use for everyone without actually keeping kids offline. And so there's a real need for evidence-based advocacy in this space, for people who understand the evidence to really go out there and explain to everyone else why age verification isn't the best approach and why we need to design these platforms for younger people to be able to use them. Because as is, 80% of Canadians want age verification, and if that doesn't change, then it's overwhelmingly likely that at some point in the next couple of years, we're going to end up with it.
I'm just going to add on that really quickly. There's actually wider benefits to making or designing products with children's privacy in mind, and that's because most adults want more privacy online as well, right? Like, most of us are suspicious about the way in which our data are used and our data are stored, and the way that third parties collect our data and give us advertisements. And it's not necessarily something in which if we're trying to address children's privacy that would somehow reduce the product for adults. It's actually easier to think about it, that children's privacy is probably just privacy for everyone in a sense.
And just to throw one more thing on there too, I do think there's a distance, there's a gap between what people say they want and what they actually want. Because our research found 2/3 of kids were given their first phone not because they asked for it, but because their parents gave it to them. Mostly, in some cases for safety concerns, mostly just so they could stay in touch. So when 2/3 of kids are getting their phones from their parents, they're typically getting that first phone around 10 to 13 years old. Well, if you give a kid a phone, you can't keep them off social media. I mean, you really can't do that. So I think we also have the risk that we're going to have a policy implemented that is going to be ignored by basically everybody, which I think is bad for the policy, and I think it's bad for kind of the rule of law generally, to have laws, especially new laws or new policies, that we know in advance most people are going to ignore.
I want to talk a little bit about equity in the AI space, and we've talked, on the panel about how important it is maybe for children to learn some of these critical skills, to learn about AI and how it can impact their day-to-day lives. But for families that have limited data, who perhaps don't have access to the TPL and the laptops they provide, what would you suggest? How can we advocate for broader access to families who don't have those resources? What can the average person do? It's challenging.
Well, I know many, many libraries do have programs,
Yeah.
and many cities, municipalities do have programs of lending things like Chromebooks and having free Wi-Fi available, not just in libraries. And these are not necessarily always known about
Yeah.
by the public, and the value of them is not necessarily known.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is making sure that people are aware of it and making sure of how to use it, making sure that we're overcoming language barriers, making sure we're providing the support so that parents don't have to worry that if their child starts using that Chromebook from the library, that they're putting themselves in a lot of risk.
And the City of Toronto operates certain free Wi-Fi access, Cisco as well, in certain areas. The city has free Wi-Fi as well, including Toronto Community Housing Corporation. So for parents who don't have access to the internet, or perhaps data is quite expensive, there are spaces, if you go to the Toronto City website, where you can find those opportunities. I want to talk a little bit about what parents can do to protect their youth, particularly if they're signing up for applications or services. One of the things I always tell parents is to read the privacy policy, but let's be honest, it's like, I don't know, the length of the Bible. It's incredibly complex, dense, but are there things that parents should think about, things that they should avoid, any to-dos or not to-dos?
I can start. I think the first thing is to educate yourself on what platform you're using. And I also, if I don't want to read the service terms, I copy and paste into AI and say, is there anything, and I could say as my role, that I should be concerned about with these terms, and it will generally flag that. Myself personally and my daughter, I use ChatGPT all the time, but I don't have an account. I don't register because I don't want my random questions being associated with my name.
Right.
And now they're teasing, you've got to create an account if you want to use some of the images. But so I don't stay logged in because there's no history on me. I'm also a data steward at work, so I really think about privacy. Where is my information going? Who's knowing if I'm asking how to replant a pug off my spider plant? Just random questions but I would say if you want to explore and use the tool together is to create a family account.
Yes.
And a generic one so you can see the history and the questions that are being asked, I think is very important as well. And limiting the time that you spend on it so that we're not replacing that human connection of, rather than talk to me, you want to take off to your room and chat with a chatbot for how long. But I really being conscious of this could add to your digital footprint. It's always linking out what database, and you don't have to use your real information for everything.
Yes, that's important.
Use a pseudonym or make something up, so not in your official legal name, you can make one up. That would be my level of comfort for privacy. And then also what tool you choose to use. So there's one, starts with a G, it ends with a K, a well-known figure. I don't know if I would necessarily use his tool. I also think about the history of the company, what are the motivations there, and what are they doing with that? So just really, even taking AI aside, how do I protect my privacy? Where is this going to end up? But service terms, pop them in a ChatGPT for flags, and you can use it for so many things. It's great that way.
I would emphasize really keeping track of what your child is doing on those platforms. So one of the things about ChatGPT or generative AI platforms a lot of the time is that they can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. And so when you sign up and you originally let a child onto one of these platforms, you might have an agreement about how they're going to be using it. They might be using it for research for school, but it turns out that they can do a whole bunch of other things on the platforms. And it might be that at first they're only using it for school, but over time they start to use it for other things. And a lot of the time when you hear the horror stories stories about AI and how it's impacted kids, the parents didn't know how the kids were using it. They thought that they were doing something entirely different on that platform. So it's about continuously checking in and understanding how that usage of the platform is evolving over time, so that you know actually what risks your kid is in danger of, and you know how to protect them from those, as opposed to just assuming they're still doing that safe first thing you talked about on the platform.
That's really interesting. So would you, in your opinion, maybe suggest sitting down with your kid and regardless of, what platform they're using, maybe ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, having a discussion about what that platform is used for specifically and how long they're using it? That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the initial discussion is obviously important, but check-in points too,
Yeah.
right? And don't just assume that the kid is still doing the same thing on the platform. I think it's really easy to assume that because with other things that children spend their time on, video games, TV, whatever, you know how they're using it over time because a video game is still a video game
Right.
six months down the line. But an hour on ChatGPT 6 months down the line might look very different than an hour on ChatGPT right now. So it does have to be sort of a continuous process.
Interesting. Well, I was just going to add my own 2 cents when it comes to privacy. I mean, Amanda, your suggestions were great. I'll also add that I think having a generic email for any type of interaction on the internet can be useful, even if you're purchasing goods online from an e-retailer or you're searching for things if it's required. Also, using a VPN would be very useful as well. And you can find several free VPNs that are available for little to no cost. For example, Proton Mail is a great one as well.
Well, I was going to say the generic email, don't put your real address when you're signing up, not your real birthday, phone number, like just doing things that would protect yourself. Everybody else pretty much said the same thing, so.
I'll be really quick. I would just build on what Angus said. Having conversations with your children about privacy and safety consistently is super important. This is not necessarily just for AI platforms, it's for any digital technology they use. Because research shows that open dialogue amongst parents, caregivers, and children actually helps keep them safe online. And it potentially keeps them more safe than using parental controls and built-in technological features. So open dialogue is key. And continuing that dialogue is important because children's capacities evolve. They grow, they mature, they have different decision-making skills, different interests. So it's something that should be ongoing and constant and hopefully fun to a degree.
Yeah, our research found exactly that. That open dialogue, involvement by parents, co-use whenever possible, has a positive effect. And that part of that open dialogue can be setting household rules, because we do have 20 years of research showing having rules in the home about what kids do online actually does make a difference in their behavior. And the rules don't have to be about punishment. Particularly for teens, they're not afraid of punishment. It's about communicating values and communicating routines. The rule can be, what do you do when this happens? And that's why we say that your number one rule should always be, if something goes wrong, come and tell us. And we promise not to freak out. We're not going to immediately take away the device or the app or whatever. We will listen to you. We will find a solution, because that is where you get problems, when kids feel like they can't come and talk to you. And that's why it's also important to avoid scare tactics. At the same time as you're teaching them about safety, we really do have to make sure we're not trying to scare them. And I've just got one plug, and that is for a terrific resource called TOSDR.org. It's short for Terms of Service Didn't Read, and it provides plain language summaries of the terms of service of most big online apps and companies, including ChatGPT, Meta, Google, Microsoft, anyone pretty much who is creating an AI tool your kids might use.
Amazing. And I notice we're almost out of time. We're going to hit to Q&As, but before we do that, can we actually just take a second and can you all share your names and company by maybe in like 2 seconds? We'll start, Matthew, with you.
Sure. I'm Matthew Johnson. I'm the Director of Education for Media Smarts, Canada's Centre for Digital Media Literacy.
I'm Evangeline Medina. I'm a startup founder of Heritage Table. And before that, I also founded Magic Board, co-founded Magic Board, which is like a AI-powered tool for kids to learn independence and routines.
My name is Riley McNair. I'm a PhD student in information studies at the University of Toronto, and I study children's privacy.
My name is Angus Lockhart. I'm a senior policy analyst at the DAIS. We're a think tank at TMU, and we study the intersection of democracy, education, the economy, and technology.
And my name is Amanda Lee. I'm a senior program manager at TELUS, supporting TELUS-WISE, our free digital literacy education program, amongst other things I do.
Okay.